hot. It's 5:04 and welcome into a Friday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. The North Carolina Court of Appeals has ordered an expedited timeline for resolving the election dispute between state Supreme Court candidates Jefferson Griffin and Allison Riggs. However, even with this compressed timeline that we're learning details about this morning, the case would extend into March. The appeals court issued its briefing schedule in an order late yesterday afternoon. Meanwhile, the State Board of Elections, supported by Riggs, hopes to bypass the North Carolina's second highest court and have the matters resolved all the way by the state Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the state. Griffin filed a request Tuesday for an expedited appeal court review, and under his plan, briefing from the appellate court would have been completed by February the 25th. The state election board and Riggs agreed to the compressed timeline. However, they objected to giving Griffin more time than other parties to prepare his briefs. Under the order that came out from the courts yesterday, issued by a unanimous unnamed three-judge appellate panel, we do not know the judges that will be on this panel, Griffin would file an initial brief by February the 24th, 10 days from now. The election board and Riggs would respond by February the 27th, with Griffin submitting his final written arguments by March the 3rd. In that timeline, it does not indicate whether the appeals court would follow up a briefing with oral arguments or anything else, and the State Board of Elections confirmed in the court filings, as well as Allison Riggs, that they are planning to support, or that Riggs is planning to support the State Board of Elections plan to ask the state Supreme Court to bypass the Court of Appeals in addressing their dispute. Riggs, who is an appointed incumbent, leads Griffin by 734 votes in that statewide election that happened back on November the 5th. Two recounts have confirmed Riggs' lead as of right now, yet Griffin challenges more than 65,000 ballots cast in the election. A state Supreme Court stay initially granted on January the 7th has blocked the election board from certifying Riggs as the winner. One interesting thing to note, this is the final and the only election contest in the entire United States that is still up in the air here as we are in the middle parts of February right now. So a couple of things happening here. If things stay with the Court of Appeals, we will learn sometime after March the 3rd what their decision is. If this is sucked up by the state's highest court in the Supreme Court, we could learn a little bit earlier. However, some of those timelines, some of those questions still up in the air this morning. And then again, if it goes directly to the Supreme Court, it would go there. And then there's the possibility to take and appeal some of what potentially comes out of the state's highest court, appeal some of that to the federal court if there are federal matters at hand. So regardless of what court it goes to and what the outcome is, there's likely to be some more appeals going on. When this exactly will be wrapped up, that is, again, very much up in the air this morning. We're keeping an eye. You can read the entire timeline, which we won't get into this morning from start to finish, by checking out our website this morning. It's carolinajournal.com. It is our top story. Griffin/Riggs election dispute would extend into March at North Carolina Court of Appeals. You can read those details again by visiting our website this morning, carolinajournal.com, where it's now 5:07, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We are keeping a close eye on the North Carolina General Assembly in Raleigh, and we've got some new legislation this morning that harps back to a conversation earlier this week about the importance of the agricultural industry in North Carolina. To get some details on this new legislation that looks to protect farmers, Katie Zender, carolinajournal.com, joins us this morning on the News Hour. Katie, thanks for the time. Tell us about this new piece of legislation introduced earlier this week.
Hi, good morning, Nick. So on Wednesday, Representative Neil Jackson, who's a Republican from Moore, introduced the Farmers Protection Act in the House of Representatives in the state. This bill would protect farmers from financial discrimination based on the use of ESG policies, or environmental, social, and governance practices. This bill is also co-sponsored by Representative Jennifer Balcom, Representative Jimmy Dixon, and Representative Carl Gillespie here in the state of North Carolina. The bill's sponsor, Jackson, told us, unfortunately, farmers in our state have encountered challenges obtaining financing by some of the larger lending institutions who have determined that farming does not align with the organization's carbon or social goals. The Farmers Protection Act ensures that there is no discrimination against NC farmers based upon a radical ESG philosophy. So basically, the bottom line with this bill is it's going to protect farmers from being discriminated against when they seek financial backing based on their use or lack of use thereof of ESG policies and practices in their productions.
Well, there's been a lot of discussion over the last couple of weeks and months about things like DEI, another acronym. ESG, Katie, is not too dissimilar in regards to the way in which it operates, and it doesn't get as much attention as something like DEI, but it's a serious threat to individuals, especially in the agricultural community.
Right, exactly. So a lot of these ESG practices and policies are coming from a climate agenda, a climate-driven agenda. But the reality is that even, though these policies are intended to sustain the environment, report social governance and benefits, these climate regulations are actually very detrimental to not only the economy, but to farmers. And they're just making it more difficult for farmers to raise crops, especially for livestock farmers. These ESG policies really target livestock farmers a lot.
Well, Katie, we talked about it earlier this week. We were talking about how large the agricultural business is in North Carolina. For folks that missed that, it is the number one business in the state. It's a tough industry, especially for a lot of these smaller mom and pop farms, Katie, who presumably would be the ones that would have to go out and try and secure some of this financing to buy very expensive pieces of equipment or all of the different things that are needed to either grow crop, as you noted, or to raise cattle. That's not something you do probably just pulling money out of your own bank. You probably have to borrow something for it.
Right, exactly. And so that's exactly what this bill does, is it protects these farmers from, financial discrimination when it comes to banks, credit unions, other financial institutions, because a lot of these banks have signed agreements or have policies that guide their guidelines to, discriminate against these farmers when it comes to their lack of use of ESG policies. And so a lot of your larger operations can maybe absorb some of these costs, but the smaller to mid-sized farmers, they're not able to foot these bills. And so they find a lot of these policies very prohibitive. And, we talked about this earlier this week, but Dr. Dorfman said, it's going to be a good year for livestock farmers. These ESG policies really target livestock farmers more than they maybe target crop farmers. So this is going to be a huge hit to livestock farmers.
Is there any particular reason that it goes after the livestock farmers versus those that are just growing, regular crops, corn, potatoes, whatever it might be?
Right. So livestock farming is a very carbon high project. And so capital is often diverted away from these farms as these ESG activists target their farms due to the methane emissions. So that's one of the reasons why livestock farmers are hit so hard as opposed to, crop farmers.
So as we look at this legislation, there's been a lot that's been introduced over the last couple of weeks. Do we have any idea where something like this goes from here? You mentioned it originated in the House, so presumably we've got to see something in the Senate and then over to the governor's desk. Any details on that?
Right. So this bill is actually going to be going into committee next week. It's going to be into Judiciary Committee. And so it will move forward from there. They'll review it, make any changes or notes, and then it will move through the traditional process. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye on this bill, tracking it, and following where it goes. But I had a chance to talk with our policy analyst over at the Center for Food, Power, and Life at the John Locke Foundation, Kelly Lester. She's been following these policies for quite a while now. She's been studying ESG policies, and she said the Farmers Protection Act would extend its anti-discrimination provisions beyond traditional banking institutions. The bill would explicitly apply its restrictions to state savings banks, state associations, and credit unions. These entities would have to adhere to the same compliance requirements and be subject to enforcement measures outlined in the legislation.
So where can folks go this morning to read not only more from Kelly, but from some of the other lawmakers that you spoke to?
Right. They can read the full article with all the quotes from Kelly and Nick Jackson and all the lawmakers and our experts that we've consulted at carolinajournal.com.
It's a great update this morning. Katie Zender joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:13, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We will get a look at traffic on your Friday morning and update with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thanks a lot, Nick.
It's 5:20. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Taking a look at some more legislation in the General Assembly this morning. The North Carolina Senate approved Senate Bill 24 on Wednesday, midweek, a measure aimed at curbing the state's high health care costs by requiring any new government health insurance mandate to be offset by repeal of an existing one. The measure passed by a vote of 30-15, with all Republicans in the Senate voting in favor of it and 3 Democrats voting for it as well. Senator Blue out of Wake County, Senator Lowe out of Forsyth, and Senator Robinson out of Guilford, all the 3 Democrats voting in favor. Kevin Corbin of Macon County said earlier this week, quote, "I think we all understand that when something is mandated, it increases costs. And we saw that happen with the Affordable Care Act. We saw prices essentially double within a very short period of time. That folks were getting tax credits for that to make up for it. But the point is, the actual cost of health insurance goes up every time you mandate it." The legislation comes in response to a recent Forbes study that ranked North Carolina as the worst state in the nation for health care costs. Proponents argued that extensive government mandates contribute to rising premiums, placing a financial strain on employers, particularly small businesses. The bill sponsors said in a joint statement, "Every day, families across North Carolina are facing tough choices because of high health care costs. It is incumbent on us to find a way to bring down these costs for families, and Senate Bill 24 is just that." The bill, which now moves to the House of Representatives for consideration, would also require any legislation imposing new mandates to include reoccurring funding for the state health plan or relevant state agencies. Currently, 58 government health insurance mandates exist in North Carolina. If passed, Senate Bill 24 would ensure that any future additions do not contribute to the increased cost without offsetting a repeal. A companion bill in the House, House Bill 46, is currently before the Committee on Rules, Calendar, and Operation of the House. We will keep an eye on both pieces of those legislations. And of course, if it is to pass the House, pass the Senate, if it is to pass the House, we shall see what Governor Josh Stein does with this. We'll keep an eye on it over at CarolinaJournal.com and here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's 5:23, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. There has been a lot of discussion nationally over the last couple of weeks about ICE and U.S. immigration and customs enforcement. We've got details this morning about some raids that have taken place here in the state of North Carolina. Those happened last weekend. To get an update on that, Teresa Opeka, CarolinaJournal.com, joins us this morning on the News Hour. Teresa, thanks for the time. Some pretty concerning details in your story.
Yes, good morning, Nick. Thanks for having me. And there's been rumblings about this gang since last year being in North Carolina, and apparently they are, because an arrest was made last weekend, and we were talking beforehand how to pronounce this. It's the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. Sounds very formal, but that's the name of the gang. There was a member arrested in Raleigh last weekend by ICE, and he's suspected to be a suspect in a mass shooting in Chicago.
Wow.
He's also wanted on federal charges for illegal entry into the U.S. And he also, let's see here, he illegally entered the U.S. near El Paso, Texas on October 1st, 2022. And officials said the U.S. Border Patrol encountered him, after which he was paroled into the country, given a notice to appear in court. But as many of them do, he never showed up for his immigration appointment. And the U.S. attorneys for the Western District of Texas later issued an arrest warrant. And here you go. I mean, it's just, there's been a series of these, and including, it was Aurora, Colorado. It was, if you recall, there was the apartment building. J.D. Vance got knocked for this, saying it was, oh, no, there's nothing going on. And how many of them they arrested? They're actually shutting that apartment complex down in Aurora. So it is a problem. And it's great to see the Trump administration is carrying out these arrests across the country, and they're not stopping.
Well, it's a couple of interesting things to note there. Suspect in a mass shooting in Chicago. But Teresa, this individual as you noted, has been in the country since late 2022 and seemingly has had some sort of arrest warrant over his head for at least a couple of years now, and seemingly has skirted under the radar of law enforcement.
Yes, yes. And that's a problem for many of these people. I mean, this all started under the previous Biden administration where they were all kind of like it's a free for all. You can come in, oh, we'll give you an appointment, and of course they don't show up. So yeah, it is pretty scary to think about all these people being here. And it's not about being against legal immigration, but you just don't know who's here. I mean, to hear that it's happening in Raleigh, in North Carolina, they're finding these people, it's very, very scary.
Let's turn the clocks back a little bit. Going back to September of last year, there was other members of this Venezuelan street gang that were arrested outside of the Charlotte metro area. What are the details there?
Sure. So I don't know if I'm going to pronounce the whole name, but we'll say this was according to TV station WBTV. It was the last name is Rojas. Also, he was also known as La Fresa. That's a little bit easier to pronounce. He was arrested in Charlotte on September 1st. He was also an alleged member of the gang and also wanted in Texas. He entered illegally about the same time in 2022. And allegedly, he lied to acquire an employment authorization card. And also, he swam across the Rio Grande River and entered the U.S. That's how desperate he wanted to get into the country. He was first arrested in July of 2022 in Orlando, Florida, on domestic violence charges. Those charges were dropped. And then he reportedly filed an asylum claim with ICE in Texas. Or U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services in Texas in August of 2023. Then his employment card was approved last February. And authorities alleged he was associated with crimes such as homicide, kidnapping, terrorism, human trafficking, and drug trafficking carried out by the gang in the U.S. He's also accused of evading police September 2023, during a law enforcement operation against gang members in the U.S. The arrest warrant was issued for him afterward, and for crimes ranging as, like we say, terrorism, trafficking in arms and ammunition, money laundering, aggravated extortion, and association to crime. So this is just, you're like, wow. And people are up in arms about, protecting these people. It's just amazing. But yeah, this started in Charlotte, and I really didn't hear too much about this last year. Did you hear much about this?
No, that didn't make a whole lot of breaking news across the country as many of these did. But this, of course, turns our attention to some laws that have changed in North Carolina over the last couple of years, Teresa. House Bill 10 passed just after the election last year, and that has some big changes for North Carolina sheriffs in areas like Charlotte, where in the past they were not necessarily complying with ICE immigrations and customs enforcement.
That's right. So that law took effect on December 1st. It now requires all law enforcement officers to cooperate with the federal immigration detainers for undocumented immigrants. And also the Sheriff's Association told Carolina Journal at that time last November it was informing all 100 sheriffs across the state and their key personnel the details of that legislation. And they also emphasized that the law is straightforward and should not require any additional training for sheriffs to implement. But the association had no role in overseeing how the sheriffs enforce House Bill 10, leaving compliance to individual counties. And a good portion, over 90 of those counties, do comply, but there are certain counties like Mecklenburg County Sheriff Gary McFadden, who has been known to disagree with these kind of requests in the past, and apparently is still feels the same way.
Teresa, where can folks read? You've got a lot more details this morning. Where can folks go and read more about that?
Sure, they can head online to carolinajournal.com.
Teresa Opeka joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:29, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get another look at traffic on this Valentine's Day Friday. An update with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you.
It's 5:36. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Don't forget, we stream live weekday mornings over on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel. You can watch along with the show or take it on the demand on the road with the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast. It's available in all of your favorite podcast apps, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, and more. Just search for the Carolina Journal News Hour, tap the subscribe, follow button, and you'll get a new show delivered to your smartphone or tablet each and every weekday morning. It's the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast. Download and subscribe now. Following up on our interview with Teresa Opeka from CarolinaJournal.com about the ICE raid that happened in Raleigh last Saturday. Well, Democrats in the North Carolina General Assembly introduced two bills this week to limit law enforcement's role in immigration enforcement at certain locations in North Carolina. This, of course, as the Trump admin cracks down on illegal immigration. House Bill 78 would prohibit law enforcement agencies and officers from assisting Immigration and Customs Enforcement in making immigration arrests or serving deportation warrants in places like religious institutions, schools, and hospitals. Recognizing the roles of immigrant workers in the agricultural and construction industry, House Bill 80 similarly would prohibit immigration enforcement at North Carolina farms and construction sites. The bills aim to protect the locations from disruption and prevent fear in vulnerable communities, according to the legislation, seeking essential services. Under North Carolina's Constitution, the state's police power is vested in the North Carolina General Assembly, explained John Gause, the senior fellow in legal studies at the John Locke Foundation, which means that the General Assembly has the power to enact the bills restricting cooperation with ICE. However, with a Republican majority that recently passed legislation to require sheriffs to cooperate with ICE in 100 counties, this bill faces a significant uphill battle in both chambers. Gause said he has mixed feelings on the bill, supporting the deportation of illegal aliens while also noting the drawbacks of law enforcement entering public areas to make a spectacle in terms of arrests. He told us, quote, "On the one hand, there are plenty of illegal aliens who ought to be deported, and I think it's fine for North Carolina law enforcement agencies to help make that happen. On the other, I don't much like the idea of federal, state, or local enforcement officials raiding churches and schools. I think mass arrests at workplaces also make for a spectacle, and I'm not sure many employers are genuinely worried about alien employees being, and I'm sure those workers could be afraid to show up for work regardless of their immigration status." Though Democrats introduced the legislation in the General Assembly for the 25 session, it's noted that they did not do so when the previous administration pushed for deportation efforts. He said, quote, "It's important to keep in mind, however, that there was a lot of mass arrests and deportations during the Obama administration, including at workplaces. I don't recall the General Assembly doing anything to block participation by state or local enforcement agencies back then. In fact, I don't recall many complaints from the left at all, which makes me suspect that these bills are politically motivated and don't respect a genuine attempt to help illegal aliens or their employers." You can read more details, including the full bill text, by visiting our website this morning, CarolinaJournal.com. And some more news out of the GA this morning. Representative Jared Lowry out of Robeson County introduced legislation on Wednesday that would offer millions of North Carolinians a retirement savings program to help small business workers who don't have access to employee-sponsored retirement plans. It's titled North Carolina Work and Save. Its number is House Bill 79, and it seeks to create the North Carolina Small Business Retirement Saving Program. It would target nearly 2 million workers in the state who currently have no access to employee-sponsored retirement plans, including employees, independent contractors, and self-employed individuals. Lowry said at a press conference earlier this week, quote, "We have North Carolinians that are not prepared if they're only saving for retirement through Social Security." The Work and Save plan would create a public-private partnership. It would allow the Treasurer's Office to set up a program where small businesses in North Carolina can sign up and have a program where their employees can sign up and save for retirement. There's no cost to the taxpayer. It's at no cost to small business, but at the end of the day, it could be a huge benefit for those small businesses, said Lowry. The average Social Security payment for a person over the age of 65 years old is about $21,000 a year. Factor in expenses like food, healthcare, and utility costs of up to $22,000 a year, explained Lowry during the press conference, meaning that North Carolinians relying solely on Social Security do not have enough for retirement. The program really is designed for small businesses that do not offer retirement saving plans and aims to help workers build a secure financial future. The legislation proposes enabling a payroll deduction system for individual retirement accounts, IRAs, allowing workers to automatically save a portion of their income for retirement. Legislators said on Wednesday that North Carolinians are 15 times more likely to sign up for retirement if it's through a paycheck deduction at work, meaning the money automatically comes out of your paycheck. The proposed program will be managed by a newly formed board through the Department of Commerce. The standard package will be a Roth IRA with a contribution rate that begins at 5% of salary or wages, with an optional increase to 8%. Employers will not be required to contribute but facilitate payroll deductions. Lowry said right now North Carolina spends hundreds of millions of dollars a year in public assistance programs. If we can have those 2 million North Carolinians prepared for retirement in 10, 20, or 30 years, we could save the taxpayers. We could save them hundreds of millions of dollars. And actually, Pew Research estimates that we could save $500 million a year in public assistance program if those nearly 2 million North Carolinians were prepared for retirement. The program is supported by AARP, and it aims to provide better retirement security for North Carolinians while reducing the strain on public assistance programs for the retirees themselves. While sponsors say there are no costs imposed on taxpayers or small businesses, the bill does appropriate $400,000 for the 25-26 fiscal year and $600,000 for the 26-27 year to kickstart the program. The idea after those in that insertion of, I'll note, $1 million, the program would become self-sustaining once more folks are signed up and operating under it. If the proposal succeeds through the General Assembly and, of course, is signed by Governor Josh Stein, it would launch by July 1st, 2027. So you're still looking at something that is many years down the road. However, a very interesting piece of legislation. Similar to the last one, you can read the entire bill details and, again, read those comments from Representative Jared Lowry, who sponsored the legislation and spoke on it earlier this week by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. It's now 5:44, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We will get another look at traffic on your Friday morning. An update with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thanks, Nick. You're up.
Good morning again. It's 5:50. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. We are continuing to track details this morning in the high-stakes race for the North Carolina Supreme Court. The Court of Appeals yesterday ordered an expedited timeline for resolving the continued election dispute between Jefferson Griffin and Allison Riggs. However, even with a compressed timeline that they announced yesterday, this case would extend at least into the early parts of March. The appeals court issued its briefing schedule in an order late yesterday afternoon. Meanwhile, the State Board of Elections, supported by Democrat Allison Riggs, hopes to bypass the North Carolina's second highest court and have the matter resolved by the state Supreme Court. Griffin filed a request on Tuesday of this week for an expedited appeal court review. Under his plan, briefing for the appellate courts would have been completed by February the 25th. The state election board and Riggs agreed to that compressed timeline. However, under the order yesterday that came out, that was issued by a unanimous unnamed three-judge appellate panel. We do not know what the political makeup or what the judges' names are that will be hearing this case yet. Griffin would file an initial brief by February the 24th, 10 days from now. The election board and Riggs would respond a few days later by February the 27th, and Griffin would be required to submit any final written arguments by March the 3rd. The timeline does not indicate whether the appeal courts would follow up briefings with oral arguments or any other sort of communication back and forth between the parties. However, the North Carolina State Board of Elections confirmed in a court filing late Wednesday that it is planning to ask the state Supreme Court to completely bypass the Court of Appeals in addressing the dispute. Riggs filed a separate court document Thursday morning yesterday supporting that plan. Just a quick reminder, Riggs, who is the appointed Democrat on the state Supreme Court, does lead Jefferson Griffin by 734 votes. That's out of more than 5.5 million ballots that were cast in the contest. Griffin is challenging some 65,000 ballots that he and his legal team contend that could change the outcome of the election. It is something that we continue to keep a very close eye on. We'll keep an eye on this briefing schedule, the back and forth legal motions, and we'll provide details as soon as we get them right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Well, we've got some concerning details this morning coming out of Wake County, Raleigh, as members of a Venezuelan street gang were arrested as part of an ICE crackdown. Going over the details this morning, U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement arrested a 24-year-old Venezuelan national, Ricardo Grandilo, a suspected member of the Tren de Aragua gang in Raleigh back on February the 8th. That was last Saturday. Authorities found a handgun, ammunition, and 10 other illegal Venezuelan migrants at the residence where Grandilo was living. He is wanted on federal charges for illegal entry and is the suspect in a mass shooting that took place in Chicago. His arrest is part of a national crackdown on the Venezuelan street gang, which has expanded into 16 states, including North Carolina. Another alleged gang member by the name of Elenzero Rojas was arrested in Charlotte in September of last year for various crimes, including terrorism and human trafficking. These arrests come as North Carolina enforces House Bill 10, which requires law enforcement to comply with federal immigration detainers. Meanwhile, soldiers from Fort Bragg are being deployed to the southern border to aid immigration enforcement, aligning with President Trump's policy to detain and deport illegal migrants. With that, you've also got legislation that is being discussed this morning from Democrats in the General Assembly to limit law enforcement's role in immigration enforcement at certain locations in the state. There's two pieces of legislation, House Bill 78 and House Bill 80. Both of them would prohibit law enforcement agencies and officers from assisting immigrations and customs enforcement in making immigration arrests or serving deportation warrants in places like religious institutions, schools, hospitals, as well as North Carolina farmlands and construction sites. The bill aims to protect the locations from disruptions and prevent fear in what is being called in the bill vulnerable communities seeking essential services. Under the North Carolina Constitution, the state police power is vested in the North Carolina General Assembly. And as I mentioned, with this House Bill 10 passing and being overridden, a veto override late last year, all sheriffs are required to cooperate with ICE in all 100 counties. So the likelihood that this legislation moves forward in any significant way in the General Assembly is incredibly low. Again, these pieces of legislation, House Bill 78 and 80, you can read additional details by visiting our website this morning at carolinajournal.com. And finally, this morning, another piece of law out of Raleigh. The Senate approved House Bill 24 Wednesday night, which is a measure aiming at curbing the state's high health care costs by requiring any new government health insurance mandate to be offset by a repeal of an existing one. The measure passed by a vote of 30-15, with all Republicans voting in favor and just 3 Democrats voting yes. They are Senators Dan Blue out of Wake County, Senator Paul Lowell out of Forsyth, and Senator Gladys Robinson out of Guilford County. Those are the only 3 Democrats voting in favor. Senator Kevin Corbin said, "I think we all understand that when something is mandated, it increases costs, and we saw that happen with the Affordable Care Act. We saw prices essentially double within a very short period of time. The point is, the actual cost of health insurance goes up every time that you mandate it." You can read more details by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com, on Senate Bill 24. That's going to do it for a Friday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. Hopefully have a great Valentine's Day. We are back with you Monday morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.